All right. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the new JFK show number 216. All right. I think Larry has a little something for us later on, but I'm going to go ahead and start off. We're going to go a little bit further on what Larry had last week. He was talking about Senator Russell and the dissenters. So I wanted to talk about the dissenting Warren Commission and Hale Boggs being from Louisiana. I did a little bit of looking into it, and he we'll see when that comes up. So the first thing I'd like to do is I have the morning paper. It's the Natchez Democrat from Natchez, Mississippi.
Pull it back just a hair. Pull it back toward you yeah, that's good.
So we've got several interesting articles here, and I think I have kind of a Fletcher Prouty moment. So I don't have the reading skills of Dr. Fetzer, but I'm going to give it my all.
You notice that's not Jackie wearing her pillbox hat. That's from earlier. What, San Antonio maybe?
Houston.
No, it's San Antonio. That's right. Flight from San Antonio, then to Dallas, where the president met his death. Yeah, Miss Kennedy.
They had a greeting committee awaiting him.
No, this is actually at Maryland Air Force Base. Is what
Gary, I was making a joke. You said where he met his death in Dallas. I said, yes, they had a greeting committee waiting for him.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't. I was reading.
Got it.
All right, so the headlines here, we have Lyndon Johnson sworn in by a woman judge. Of course, we know that was the opportunity to switch the body, so you guys just kind of elaborate as we go along. All right, so
that does appear to be when the body was taken out of the casket and put in the body bag in the compartment at Air Force One that would be offloaded when all the attention was focused on the bronze ceremonial casket. The actual body was being offloaded on the opposite side, loading into a helicopter, which I'm convinced took it to Walter Reed, where you had the best forensic pathologists in the military who removed bullet fragments. And then it was put into a pinkish gray shipping casket and taken in a black hearse to the back of the morgue while the whole official entourage in the gray Navy ambulance with Jackie was proceeding toward the hospital.
Yeah, what I'd like to point out is this is the morning paper, and my mother's been living in Natchez, Mississippi for a long time, and this paper comes out at 5 a.m. So I think that's kind of important to recognize that this paper was the 23rd, 1963 morning edition.
23rd, Gary.
Yes, 23rd.
So that's the morning of the Saturday after the assassination.
Right, and so Oswald didn't find out that he was even charged with killing the president until midnight. So we've got an awful lot of stuff to go on if you're going to not only have the paper on the street, it has to be printing at 2, 3 in the morning.
Right. This is consistent with Fletcher Prouty's report in Christchurch, New Zealand, where he got a full report on Lee, including a portrait quality photograph of before he'd been indicted.
Right. Yeah, so that's one of the articles that I'm going to talk about last. All right, so first of all, I want to read about Lyndon Johnson and how the propaganda was going wild the very next day, even before the next day. All right, Lyndon B. Johnson coming into the presidency on the assassination of John F. Kennedy had high esteem from the president and confidence. From the old politics foes in the Democratic Party, they became a close working team. Johnson tried in the 60s for the presidential nomination. When Kennedy won, Johnson accepted second place on the Democratic ticket. Accepting, too, the Kennedy leadership, he became an extraordinarily active on behalf of the Kennedy policies. This activity included work for the civil rights program Kennedy laid down.
This is basically bullshit.
Cut. I was going to say cut. Jim, tell us how LBJ got on the ticket.
Right. He forced himself on the ticket. He wasn't even on their long list, much less their short. Jack had already invited Stuart Symington to be his running mate, but gave him overnight to think about it. When Bobby went by the Johnson suite to extend a pro forma offer he never expected Lyndon to have the least interest in, he was astonished when he jumped on it. He threatened to expose that Jack had Addison's disease, wasn't expected to live a long, healthy life, that he'd had dalliances with beautiful women, some of whom were spies for East Germany. Information had been provided by J. Edgar Hoover, and asserted if he were not on the ticket, then any legislative proposals from the White House would be dead on arrival, because as the powerful majority leader of the Senate, he would make sure they went nowhere. Bobby and Jack were stunned by this development, couldn't figure a way out of it, and were forced to accede to Johnson's demand to be his running mate. When one of his wealthy friends learned that Lyndon would be on the ticket with Jack, he burst into the Johnson suite cursing and swearing, because now LBJ was going to help JFK become elected. Bobby Baker took him into a bedroom and explained what they had in mind. He came out all smiles and said he thought that was an excellent plan. Bobby Baker would later declare in public that Jack would not live out his first term, that he would die a violent death. And in the course of events, Lyndon would send his chief executive assistant, Cliff Carter, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination.
Well, it says here that because of the extraordinarily working relationship, Johnson lost a little popularity in the South as they were working on civil rights. All right.
And Jim didn't even mention, Jim didn't even mention the relationship with Madeline Brown, which that's a whole different.
That's another whole thing right there. But listen to this next paragraph. It says, there was some talk this year that Johnson might be dumped from the ticket. Well, that's a lot of information on the very next morning, wouldn't you say? But on October 31st, Kennedy was asked whether, if he ran next year, would Johnson again be on the ticket. He said, he says yes to both. Wait, I'm sorry. Let me start over. All right. But on October 31st, Kennedy was asked whether, if he ran next year, he would again want Johnson as the vice presidential nominee, and whether he expected Johnson to be on the ticket. He said yes to both of these questions. That is correct, Kennedy said. Johnson is a former Democratic senator from Texas, best known for his vigorous, aggressive way he handled the job of Democratic leader to the Senate.
Jack Enright told Evelyn Lincoln, his personal secretary, that he wasn't going to run with Lyndon. He was thinking about Terry Sanford of North Carolina as his running mate. But at that point in time, he might have not been prepared to announce it. I expect Lyndon, you see, was in the deep thicket from three different scandals. There was the Boeing TFX scandal. There was John Marshall scandal, where, you know, this federal investigator from the Department of Agriculture. Yeah, right. And there was a Bobby Baker scandal. In fact, there was a vote taking place in the Senate the day of the 22nd that was widely expected to so tarnish Lyndon's reputation that Jack would be unable to run with him again, even if he had wanted to do so. So, you know, this was a great time for him to be taken out from the
Well, Jim, also, we know that during the days after, supposedly, normally after the assassination, those days, Life magazine supposedly was going to do an expose on LBJ, sponsored.
That's right. Very good. Very good. Bobby been working with a publisher, a very extensive expose about Lyndon and his history of corruption. It was also going to guarantee he couldn't be on the ticket, and probably would have led to his indictment.
And was deep six that weekend.
Right. You're absolutely right. 100% correct.
Wow. So what direction might the Johnson administration take? Is going to be one of action. We must prove that the Democratic Party is going to be a party of action. So that's the end of that one. All right, so
a party of action.
Yeah, there we go.
Like action by committing ourselves again to Vietnam, to not allowing it to become communist, right? Even though the Vietnamese were fiercely nationalistic. And
I think that kind of segues a little bit. This is another paper that I found dated 1956.
You're putting light right in the camera.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's the Nazi Democrat, November 7th, 1956, and I think more related to this than we may think. You can see, where is it here?
Put away the flashlight and let us see the paper. Yeah, okay. Eisenhower, this is when Eisenhower was elected. Yeah,
1952. This is 1952.
1956.
56. All right.
this is the second election of Eisenhower.
Yeah.
Can you read that?
Second term.
Israel, can you read that?
No, we couldn't see Israel.
Oh, at the bottom, May 1, boundary revision.
Yeah, Israel wants boundary revision. So this was going on in 56. So I don't think that the Kennedy assassination wasn't part of more boundaries.
Really, Israel just wants all the Middle East. That's real simple. You know, I don't think it's.
All right, so next up we have Connally's condition. And once again, this is at 3 in the morning. They were printing this stuff up. Dallas, Texas, Governor John B. Connally of Texas, wounded by a sniper who assassinated John Kennedy, underwent surgery Friday and later was described by his doctor as not in critical condition. Dr. Robert Shaw, Connally's attending physician, said, the governor seems to have been struck by just one bullet, which entered the back of his chest and moved outward, taking out a rib and fragmenting a portion of his rib. The bullet emerged from his chest and struck his wrist and thigh. The thigh wound is trivial.
You know how the wrist and the thigh are connected, of course, Gary. I mean, that would have to be one bullet.
Just go straight through there, you know. But to have this story they were going to stick with for the next 53 years, it was pretty swift, if you ask me.
Well, you know, when Robert Shaw, MD, was asked about the magic bullet, he said he thought it was most unlikely that bullet had caused all the damage since he'd removed more lead from John Connally's wrist than was missing from that bullet.
Yeah. And he also said that he left a good portion of a bullet in his thigh.
Right, I know. And when after his death, they asked to have it removed, Nellie refused on the ground. You had to work that out with John before he was buried.
Yeah. In making a wound in the chest, the fragment from the rib caused considerable tissue damage. It was found there was a tear in part of the lung and a small hole in the lower lobe. Shaw said, from what we know about his condition, at the present time, he will completely recover without disability of any sort. He estimated Connally would be in the hospital for 10 to 14 days. He said Connally had not been told about the president's death. I just have a hard time with that one.
That's ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous.
First thing he would have asked would have been.
He even said while the shooting was going on, they're going to kill us all.
Right. They're going to kill us all.
There you go. All right, so the last little article here. This is my Fletcher Prouty moment. I just kind of think that, well, you tell me what you think. All right, ex-Marine, lived in New Orleans.
You want to show us that paper too?
Hey, wait a minute. Don't you think, Gary?
All of this is on the front page.
That paper got pretty torn up.
Yeah, it's I only have the front page left.
We don't need the flashlight. Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's on the same. That's the same copy of the paper you were reading before.
Yeah, there it is. Ex-Marine, right? This may be the last time we ever use this paper, but ex-Marine in New Orleans.
All right.
2 of them. So.
What day is that? 22nd or 23rd?
23rd.
The next morning edition, out at 5 a.m. I want everyone to know that.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. So hang on, see if I can get one more read out of this newspaper before it disintegrates. All right, ex-Marine lived in New Orleans.
It's all for a good cause.
Yeah. Police records here show that Lee Oswald, being questioned in the assassination of President Kennedy, gave his birthplace as New Orleans and arrested last summer. He was arrested in August during a melee that developed after he started passing out pro-Castro leaflets on Canal Street. He was convicted of disturbing the peace and fined $10. At the time of his arrest, he listed himself as a native of New Orleans. He listed his occupation as a mechanic. So I wonder if that was oiling up the coffee shop grinders.
A mechanic.
That's strange. He never did try to pass himself.
I know that's a term also used for the professional shooters, mechanics.
That's true too. But he also oiled. Remember, he was an oiler?
Well, if you want to include the maintenance work that he did at the Riley Coffee Company, Jim, I don't know.
He was actually an oiler. He would oil up the chains.
Well, that would probably classify as,
a mechanic.
in a broad sense.
Yeah. So All right, so it said, when he first came to New Orleans in midsummer, he lived a few days with his aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Charles F. Murat. He stayed several days.
Not mentioning that Dutch was a colleague of Carlos Marcello and in the mob. So
And his cousin had been also intelligence.
it's interesting what they leave out.
Yeah, they just omission. He just stayed a few days, says Miss Murat. The steamship clerk, she was a steamship clerk. We hadn't seen him in years and haven't seen him since he left here. Murat said Oswald told him he was looking for a job and he had found one. He said, I seldom saw him, but I find this very interesting here.
That's SOB.
After leaving the Murats, he moved into a one-bedroom apartment with his wife and child and promptly got into trouble as he began plastering the porch and the house with propaganda.
Yeah, you know probably who planted all that story? Ed Butler and the Inca people, Gary.
Yeah, well, they were
Very good, Larry. Very good, yeah. Propaganda indeed, Gary. Good.
I mean, they were the ones.
Yep.
So here's the official story in one column. It says, a hidden gunman assassinated President Kennedy with a high-powered rifle Friday. All right, Dr. Fessers, tell us about the high-powered rifle.
Oh, come on.
All right.
It's a joke, I mean.
I know. 3 shots reverberated. Blood sprang from the president's face. He fell face down, backwards.
Sprang from the president's face.
You're right. And
so they're trying to imply a bullet that went through and came out his face.
Right. His wife clutched his head and he tried to lift it, crying, "Oh no!" Half an hour later, John F. Kennedy was dead, and the United States presidency was handed to Lyndon Johnson. Within an hour, the police had arrested 24-year-old man.
Wasn't that fast work?
Man, they're just tearing it up. After Dallas policeman had been killed, Captain Fritz said Friday the witness had plenty of evidence on.
That's right. It was a cinch case.
It was already cinched.
And Wade and Henry Wade also.
That's right.
That following day.
That's right. Good stuff. Good stuff, Gary.
Yeah. Hit pause for a second, Dr. Fetzer.
Okay. Hang on.
Yeah. Being from Louisiana, Hale Boggs was a high-powered congressman they say worked with Lyndon Johnson, but he had a couple of things to say. Now, this is, I think, a man who is in fear of his life, I really believe.
The Warren Commission took testimony from many, many witnesses, well over 1,000. The testimony runs in 26 bound volumes into many, many millions of words.
It's true.
It had at its disposal the complete resources of the FBI, the Secret Service, the CIA, the intelligence of the Army, Navy, Air Force, the State Department, the law enforcement officials of the state of Texas, the Attorney General of this state, law enforcement officials of Dallas.
You didn't know they were all complicit. You might think that was
the only direction to the commission, which was made up of a bipartisan commission. My colleague, the Republican leader in the House, served on the commission, as did Senator Cooper. As a matter of fact, the majority of the members of the commission were members of the opposition party. The only admonition we had was to find the truth, and we sought the truth. And my own conviction is that we found it. My own conviction is that there's no doubt about it.
Wow. He basically named everyone who was a suspect in the assassination.
I know.
He didn't even mention who it was.
Yeah.
He's not mentioning anybody there at the end.
We had everyone did a good thing. All right, real quick here.
Go for it.
Let's go to this one. All right, Dr. Fetzer, if I could employ your excellent reading skills.
Many of you are familiar, I'm sure, with Larry Hancock's book, Someone Would Have Talked, which grapples with the question of why someone didn't spill the beans in the JFK assassination. Lori looked at what some interesting people did say, both before and after the assassination, and used that as an approach to connecting the dots between likely players in the murder of President Kennedy. I want to talk today about a whole other set of people, the political elite class in the country, from Lyndon Johnson and Robert Kennedy to their aides and other highly placed people. What you'll see is that many of these people also talked, although they often did so only many years later, sometimes in private and sometimes on the record. We'll find that in many ways this group shared with the rest of us disbelief in the lone disgruntled gunman story. What we don't find, for the most part, are strong indications that they really knew the answer to who killed JFK beyond intelligent hunches. But some of their statements offer interesting clues and point the way toward information they had, which has since gone missing. Perhaps as importantly, looking at their statements can help us understand how it is 45 years later, at the time this was authored in May of 2013, that the American people still doesn't know how its 35th president was felled. Dissenters. As many of you already know, 3 of the 7 Warren commissioners expressed disbelief in their own conclusions, particularly the single bullet theory, though not limited to it. Richard Russell told Harold Weisberg, "We have not been told the truth about Oswald." Hale Boggs turned against FBI Director for Life J. Edgar Hoover shortly before his plane disappeared over Alaska. And an aide of Boggs said that Boggs told him, "Hoover lied his eyes out to the commission on Oswald, on Ruby, on their friends, the bullets and guns, you name it." John Sherman Cooper was part of the group that attempted to get a dissent into the Warren report until talked out of it in the Warren Commission session that was never transcribed. David Rohn found a draft of the report in J. Lee Rankin's papers on which Cooper had written this. "On what basis is it claimed the 2 shots caused all the wounds? It seemed to me that Governor Connally's statement negates such a conclusion. I could not agree with this statement." These doubts about the commission's reconstruction of the shooting, atop which the whole shaky edifice of the lone psychopathic gunman story sits, is reinforced by a revealing comment from Kennedy's Irish Mafia, Ken O'Donnell and Dave Powers.
Stop. Who were riding in the Queen Mary, Jim, by the way?
Of course, that's exactly what the same sentence says. They were right, and the Secret Service follow-up card later told Tip O'Neill that, in contrary to O'Donnell's testimony to the Warren Commission, they had heard shots from behind the Grassy Knoll. O'Donnell told O'Neill, "I told the FBI what I had heard, but they said it couldn't have happened that way and that I must have been imagining things. So I testified the way they wanted me to. I just didn't want to stir up any more pain and trouble for the family." Tip O'Neill, by the way, was astonished when they said there were bullets whizzing all over the place. He called him on it, said, "That's not what you told the Warren Commission in response."
But he wasn't interested in pursuing it, even though
It was for the family. It was for the family. Don't worry.
Pain and trouble for the family? Lying under oath didn't make that go away, unfortunately. During an intense moment of such pain in the aftermath of Robert Kennedy's murder, Ted Kennedy let down his guard a bit as he talked to NBC's correspondent Stander Van Oker about the faceless men with no apparent motive charged in the slaying of both his brothers and Martin Luther King, and added, "There has to be more to it."
You think in private that's how the Kennedys talk?
Yeah, there has to be more to it.
Hello.
I know. Look, Kennedy had his back broken in a plane crash. I mean, everybody crashes in planes around here. It's just something that goes on all the time.
Or drives off of bridges.
Yeah, that was another thing. But I mean, they nearly broke his back, or they did. I'm not sure, but it was very bad.
There's a movie about that Chappaquiddick thing, by the way, on Netflix, I believe.
Yeah, it was actually in the theaters. I went to the film. It was halfway decent. Wasn't being sparing of Teddy, that's for sure.
Right.
Speaking of the Kennedys, it turns out that a number of people in the Kennedy inner circle have talked on the record about Dallas. Tony Summers, Anthony Summers, author and prominent, talked to William Atwood, who was key in the back channel talk to Castro that JFK was encouraging in the summer and fall of 1963, behind the back of his own State Department. This secret venture was fraught with domestic peril, and we know that the CIA debriefed journalist Lisa Howard after one of her conversations with Castro. And there's great reason to suspect that the secret Atwood initiative was not, in fact, a secret. Thus, Atwood's words are worth paying attention to. If the CIA did find out what we were doing, this would have trickled down to the lower echelon of activists and Cuban exiles. And the more gung-ho CIA people who've been involved since the Bay of Pigs, I can understand why they would have reacted so violently. This was the end of their dreams of returning to Cuba, and they might have been impelled to take violent action, such as assassinating the president. The trouble being that attributed to a much lower level that in fact was responsible. Arthur Schlesinger, the historian and Kennedy special advisor, who told Ray Marcus, "I can't look and I won't look at photos from Dealey Plaza," concurred with Atwood. That was odd, Larry. Why would Arthur Schlesinger not look at pictures from Dealey Plaza?
He just doesn't want to know. You know,
I mean, they'd been sanitized anyway. I mean,
real quick, Dr. Professor and Jim, I was talking to one of my students who's a captain of the fire department, and I began to tell him about the fires being on purpose in California, and he looked at me and he said, "I don't want to know."
You don't think all these Irishmen, you know, at least in that inner circle, would have been talking about all this, you know?
Sure.
Investigating and everything, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, Evelyn Lincoln even wrote a letter to a high school student about the individuals and groups she believed were involved, including the anti-Castro Cubans, Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, and the military industrial peoples, and the Dallas people. I mean, she was very good and astute in identifying.
And she held a lot of the autopsy material for a long time, including the Harper fragment, which she delivered directly to Admiral Berkeley. Okay.
She was a good person. Here we get Arthur Schlesinger. Undoubtedly, if word leaked to President Kennedy's efforts, that might have been exactly the kind of thing to trigger some explosion of fanatical violence. It seems to me a possibility not to be excluded. Yeah, but surely he has to know Lyndon was in the business here of taking out Jack. I mean, for crying out loud. This is whitewashing to suggest it was. Oh, no.
Going back to Evelyn Lincoln, when she delivered that piece of bone to Admiral Berkeley, it disappeared right after that, Jim. Which is a lot of researchers, or at least I do, believe it was the actual Harper fragment.
Yeah, very good. Much more recently, Joan Mellon gagged me with a spoon, quoted Schlesinger's reply to Wilbur Thomas, an acquaintance of his, who asked Schlesinger, whom he believed was behind the assassination of President Kennedy. We were at war with the national security people. Well, now that's a decent report to come from a dubious source like Joan Mellon. Dick Goodwin, who was in Kennedy's State Department in Latin American affairs, was even more blunt. We know the CIA was involved in the mafia. We all know that.
Oh, the mafia again.
The last quote comes from David Talbot, Brothers, The Hidden History of the Kennedy Years, a book I highly recommend in part because of the number of people Talbot got on the record. Goodwin's sentiment was echoed by Frank Mankiewicz, who at the time of the Garrison investigation was told by RFK to look into this, read everything you can, so if it gets to a point where I can do something about this, you can tell me what I need to know. Mankiewicz told Talbot that he turned himself into an assassination buff at that. I came to the conclusion that there was some sort of conspiracy, probably involving the mob, anti-Castro Cuban exiles, and maybe rogue CIA agents. Every so often I'd bring this up with Bobby. I told him who I thought was involved, but it was like he just couldn't focus on it. He got this look of pain, or more like numbness on his face. It just tore him apart. I do believe it was Frank Mankiewicz, by the way, who led Bobby at the Ambassador into the pantry when he was supposed to exit out through the auditorium. So I don't have any enthusiasm for Frank Mankiewicz, who I believe was a traitor. Now let's go back, Gary, so I see what I've got here. Okay. Now there's something very wrong about the former Attorney General of the United States asking an aide to read conspiracy books to find out what happened to his brother, the president. The studies and others tell me a few things, I think. One, they, and by this I mean particularly the Kennedy insiders, didn't really know for a fact who killed JFK. All they would have had to do was to ask,
who benefited?
Evelyn Lincoln, who had a list. Second, said that the Warren Commission was a public relations exercise and that the evidence against Oswald amassed by the FBI and the Commission wasn't to be believed. And these people, I might add, Schlesinger, Goodwin, Atwood, and others, not to mention Robert Kennedy himself, knew more about the real workings of government investigation than most. 3, their collective gut feeling for what it's worth caused them to suspect the CIA, Cuban exiles, and organized crime. And I must add, Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Remember Mr. X in the movie JFK, you know?
Of course, Fletcher Brown.
Yeah,
Sutherland.
Sutherland, Donald Sutherland.
Yeah.
Who had
It was a figure based on Fletcher Browning.
Right, exactly.
But if Robert Kennedy's associates didn't have much more than gut feelings to go on, what RFK himself knew is less clear. I'd like to review some of what Bobby Kennedy said in private to various people and see what light it can shed. David Talbot's brothers, again, is a great source here. On the afternoon of November 22nd, RFK called his close friend Henry Roos Williams, someone Bobby was working on with anti-Castro activities during 1963. He said to either Harry Williams or Haynes Johnson, if you credit both Talbot and Lamar Waldron. Lamar Waldron.
Ultimate Sacrifice. Ultimate Sacrifice.
He's bad. That's a terrible, terrible book. That Johnson himself keeps changing his mind about who RFK told this to. In any case, what RFK said was this: one of your guys did it. Well, there's a whole lot more elaborate than that. I mean, that's right-headed, but obviously hopelessly inadequate. It's pretty amazing, 6 words, apparently not in the form of a question. Joe Mellon believes, based on her conversation with Angelo Mergado, that Bobby Kennedy was aware of Oswald prior to November 22nd and even seen a photo of him. Whether this is true or not, the idea that Oswald was an anti-Castro agent and that RFK was either aware or was quickly made aware of this after the assassination is certainly a compelling interpretation of this comment. Notice anti-Castro, not pro. Those 6 words is not much to go on, but that's for sure. John McCone arrived at Hickory Hill to spend a few hours with Bobby before this call was made, and thus McCone might in theory have delivered information about Oswald. The call to Harry Williams was apparently made before a call from FBI Director Hoover that we'll see in a minute. Now, when McCone first arrived, RFK greeted him in an unusual way. I asked McCone if they had killed my brother, and I asked him in a way that he couldn't lie to me. But the fact of the matter is McCone was kept out of the loop. He didn't know what was going on. So he couldn't have answered the question based upon personal knowledge. McCone and RFK were both devout Catholics, so presumably this verification involved rosary beads or stacks of Bibles.
Man.
I must admit, I've always found this scene strange. I was hoping you wouldn't ask me whether we killed your brother, the president, Bob, because I cannot tell a lie. In any case, by McCone's own admission, he was unaware of CIA plots to kill Castro for more than 18 months after heading the CIA. So his lack of knowledge is hardly definitive. As I say, it was actually intentional. RFK's friend John Siegenthaler said it was clear that McCone was out of the loop. Dick Helms was running the agency. Anything McCone found out was by accident. Now, just a personal note about Siegenthaler. When I did that 7-part, 3.5 hours in 1994, JFK, the assassination, the cover-up, and beyond, I eventually sent a copy to John Siegenthaler, and he actually watched it and wrote back to me that, basically that it had confirmed his worst suspicions. I mean, he knew what I was reporting there, had it right. Just following the call to Harry Williams, RFK spoke to J. Edgar, who told him Oswald went to Russia and stayed 3 years. He came back to the United States in June 1962 and went to Cuba on several occasions, but would not tell us what he went to Cuba for. I'm unaware that Lee Oswald ever went to Cuba. In fact, he doesn't even appear to have gone to Mexico City, much less to Cuba. You went too far down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very long article. I was just wanted to get to what Jackie had to say, and unless y'all want to continue on with what we were doing.
Well, I was okay with it.
Okay, there we go.
Now, Hoover was famous for misspeaking, but look, note that Hoover hasn't simply mixed up Russia and Cuba, since he reports the Soviet defection correctly right down to the month. Instead, he adds that Oswald went to Cuba. It's odd that Army intelligence files, the ones routinely destroyed in 1973, also contain the information, whether true or not, that Oswald had been to Cuba. This coincidence is very curious, even if, as we think we know, Oswald had never been to Cuba. So we know that initially, and perhaps based on information about Oswald, to which we, the public, are not privy, even 45 years later, Bobby suspected the anti-Castro activists and the CIA. Bobby also tasked Walter Sheridan to try and get the skinny on organized crime involvement. A week after the assassination, Bobby and Jackie delivered an extraordinary message to Soviet Chairman Khrushchev via friend William Walton and Georgy Bolshakov, who had been the Kennedys' back channel during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The message, once again delivered to the leadership of a communist enemy, behind the back of the State Department at the height of the Cold War, there was a large political conspiracy behind Oswald's rifle, and that Dallas was the ideal location for such a crime. Perhaps there was only one assassin, but he did not act alone. Of course, there were 6 or 8. So it's clear from many sources that RFK was not a believer in the Warren report, despite a few tepid endorsements he may have made. But it's also not clear that he had the inside scoop on the assassination conspiracy. And he wasn't consistent in what he told aides. For instance, he told Arthur Schlesinger, there could be no serious doubt that Oswald was guilty, but there was still argument if he had done it by himself or as part of a larger plot, whether organized by Castro or by gangsters. The FBI thought it had done it by itself, but McComb thought there were 2 people involved in the shooting. Of course, ridiculous simplification. Organized by Castro? What happened to one of your guys did it? By this point, a couple of weeks after Dallas, a series of leads pointing to Castro, most emanating from Mexico City, had been flooding into Washington. I'm going to return to the Castro solution in a bit. The second sentence here is interesting. For one thing, add McCone to the conspiracy believer list. This quote comes from December 9th, 1963, by the way, the same day the FBI report was completed and long before books exposing the holes in the single bullet theory would be written. And take it at face value, it has Bobby Kennedy believing Oswald was a shooter, maybe even the sole shooter. This brings up an interesting side question. Did Bobby really think Oswald was a sole gunman, regardless of what conspiracy might lie behind Oswald's gun? I, for one, don't have any doubt there were multiple gunmen and a medical cover-up in the case. Was Bobby a victim of that cover-up, or was he actually part of it? And this comment to Schlesinger is being less than truthful about what he knew. The question of Bobby Kennedy and his possible involvement in cover-up of his own brother's murder is not, I think, a simple topic and not one I'm going to address adequately in these few minutes, but the topic is no longer taboo, and some authors have tackled it with mixed results. Here are a few relevant questions, I think. 1, if there was a medical cover-up starting right there during the autopsy at Bethesda, when the throat wound was not dissected, access to JFK's clothing was denied, and other basic autopsy procedure were jettisoned for reasons which go way beyond bungling. Was Bobby a victim of this or an author? Now, there are many stories that Bobby was secretly pulling the strings here, possibly keep the doctors away from JFK adrenals, although last time I checked, the adrenals were next to the kidneys and not up in the neck, and the body cavity was examined and the neck wasn't. And in fact, the Thomas Evans Robinson reported there were no adrenal glands. But when you track them down, the stories that RFK was limiting the autopsy from the 17th floor of Bethesda are all conjecture and hearsay and inference. In fact, they're ridiculous. Finkelwood, his Clay Shaw trial couldn't remember who told him not to dissect the neck, who got his memory back for the HSCA medical panel. He told the panel in previously secret testimony it was Admiral Galloway who passed on the restrictions to the autopsy team. Harold Weisberg found a staff interview in the HSCA took with Galloway by phone, in which Galloway stated no orders were being sent in from outside the autopsy room, either by phone or in person, which obviously implies that it was under control of people in the autopsy room, including himself. I'm not saying the stories of RFK's interference with the autopsy may not be true, just urging caution, especially when whether the easy answer of the adrenals is what was at play here, in any case, by many.
Ooh, I lost it. But,
By many accounts, Dr. Berkeley, the president's personal physician, was a key player in the autopsy, by some accounts running the show. Berkeley and Bobby were hardly strangers. Berkeley was RFK's go-to guy on procuring the brain and autopsy slides, subsequently, among other things. And even if Berkeley was not managing the autopsy on RFK's behalf, Berkeley had to know the score. McHugh, do you agree with the Warren report on the number of bullets that entered President Kennedy's body? Berkeley, I would not care to be quoted on that.
absolutely. So, but anyway, this just continues on. But I had something else to show you guys real quick. If you want to hit pause real quick.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. Also here, the Warren Commission report. What does a Yale Law School person calling the White House? But I do happen to have the audio here, so let's go ahead and listen to it, and we can discuss it.
Talk to you.
Thank you, boy. If I can help in any way, I will. I'm calling with a suggestion. I've just talked to Nick Katzenbach.
Yes.
And the poor fella, he has so much of a burden on him.
Yes.
Talked to him about 3 times today. And he just sounded so groggy. I thought I'd pass this thought along to you. And of course, I realize how tough it must be now for the president. In this situation, with this bastard killed, my suggestion is that a presidential commission be appointed of very distinguished citizens in the very near future, bipartisan and above politics. No Supreme Court justices, but people like Tom Dooley and Bill Story from Texas,
Right.
so on.
Right.
A commission of 7 or 9 people, maybe Nixon, I don't know,
Right.
to look into the whole.
Maybe Nixon? My goodness.
Of the murder of the president. Because world opinion and American opinion is just now so shaken by the behavior of the Dallas police that they're not believing anything.
That's, I can understand that.
Now, I've got a party here. I've been pursuing the policy, that people need to come together at this time.
You know what you could do that would be very helpful, and this is a good suggestion, and I'll pass it on just a minute. The president's calling.
Well, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, go ahead.
What can I do to go help?
Well, I was just thinking, coming in a few minutes ago after hearing the news of Oswald's shooting, that this is symptomatic of what has been happening in this country in the last few years, and the breakdown of respect for law and order. The signs impeach the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I could have a memorandum to give to the president along these lines, that one of his great tasks is to help, continue the institutions that seem to be, at least if not in doubt right now, at least weakened by some kind of sickness that has taken hold of some parts of our population. I'd like him to have that to consider in some private talks he's having with newsmen and with perhaps for his joint session next Wednesday night. He needs to make some point, that America is known as a land of public order, a land of civility, a land of which the public safety is guaranteed, and there's a very serious question right now in the mind of the world about these institutions that undergird us so tremendously. And
His Gettysburg speech last spring was just terrific.
Yes.
Couldn't have been better.
yes.
I'll be glad to send any member
All right.
right away.
All right. Now, your suggestion is that he appoint a special commission of distinguished Americans, primarily in the field of law, I presume, to look into the whole question of the assassination.
Good.
All right.
Report on it.
All right. I'll get that to him. Also, I wish you would keep me informed about how Nick is doing. We don't want to put any greater strain on him than is necessary. But
Well,
he's an able man.
Utmost faith in him, but
Yes.
he's fighting back.
All right.
Terrific. Right.
Thanks for calling. I'll follow through.
Right.
Goodbye.
Yeah, what it seems like to me that the American people are beginning to wake up for the first time, that their government lies to them just constantly. And to me, it was Jim Garrison who cracked the egg, because before the assassination, they enjoyed almost complete belief in anything that was said. And so imagine if the CIA would have had another 10 years with that same belief in everything that they said, anything that was on the news. Well, they would be further down the line than they are. Okay, now I'm not saying that we've stopped them 100%, but Jim Garrison is the one that cracked the egg that began the awakening of the American people. And now we're at a point where we don't believe anything, including the news of today. So that's what I have to say. So Larry, you got something for us?
Larry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, you muted.
Sorry about that, guys.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, do we still have some time, or you want to?
Yeah. We got about, I'd say 15 minutes. Is that enough?
No, well, you know, I really don't have anything. I've been following with a lot of interest what you were saying there. And, you know, what can I say? I think, remember I talked about Robert Cutler, the architect?
The one who did the drawings of Dealey
Plaza? Yeah, the one who did the original drawings and did
right.
I thought maybe since, you know, this is, you know, miscellaneous time, you know, I could show you guys what he actually put out. Are you there? It says the Grassy Knoll.
Yeah, we can see it. Very good.
Yeah. This is vintage stuff, Jim. You know, the Grassy Knoll Gazette. He put this out in the late 70s, I believe, up until 1979. But, you know, bear in mind that a lot of these, what he called himself, an assassinologist, really did not follow any guidelines as far as schedules, you know, to publish stuff, you know. So they just, whenever, you know, they had enough material, you know, they would publish. You know, for example, I know that the third decade when that was starting out, you know, was like that. And you know, these fly-by-night, some of these were actually fly-by-night newsletters and stuff like that.
There's an interesting quote from Sigmund Freud at the top there, Larry, in the upper right. Let me read it. Crowds have never thirsted after truth. They demand illusions and cannot do without them.
That's right.
Wow, what a statement.
That's right. So, you know, this is the guy that was an architect, Jim, and he was so into this, you know, and at the time, this is the 70s, don't forget, you know, the limitations as far as data. You know, now we look at images and stuff, you know, we can propagate them, you know, across the world, you know, like that. And
it took Harold Weisberg 10 years to pry it out.
Yeah, and a lot of postage involved, you know, and that kind of thing. But like I said, this is the guy that actually did that Dealey Plaza map, like Gary was talking about, just probably a year or two, you know, after the assassination, when all the landmarks were still fresh, Jim, and before, you know, everything that happened there, that they've changed so many things there, and this guy, you know, he was the contemporary news and stuff, but, you know, mostly about Kennedy, about the JFK assassination. And some of the stuff, you know, that he put out, you know, just really remarkable because it still holds true today. Okay. You know, the arguments and that kind of thing. Okay. For example, here, we're talking about the autopsy. Okay. Which we all know was a sham, you know, by, you know, three gentlemen who had not even done any autopsies. You know, according to Paul O'Connor, you know, and all these other guys, Jenkins and
Oswald.
Boswell was one of the ones who did the autopsy. But I'm talking about the lower guys, you know, that were involved, you know, like O'Connor and David were involved in
right.
The most mundane things, you know, during the autopsy, which I'm sure Jim.
Sure. I've talked with most of these guys, and
right. So anyway, he did a lot of investigating, And a lot of the stuff, in these papers and in these articles, like I said, still hold true today. And it's interesting, if anybody wants to really, start off, with some really interesting point of views. I think these are the first ones, a lot of really, really good stuff. Let's see if I can find something here that we can.
Well, why don't you back up a little bit, and I'll read a little bit of this if you want to.
Let me see them down here.
Well, if you go back a bit.
Not Prio, that's Prio Socorraz.
If you go back a bit, Larry, that was talking about Cyril Wecht and.
Okay. Let me just go back.
Yeah, a little further. Okay, here we go. Wait a minute. Answers to some questions. No, you're too high. Yeah.
Okay. This has to do with an independent examination. Remember in Latimer for the...
Okay, I'll pick it up here. In 1972, Burke Marshall, the acting representative of the Kennedy family estate, allowed the first person outside of government auspices to examine the x-rays and photos related to the Kennedy assassination. Actually, David Manning wrote to Burke Marshall and got his permission to enter the archives.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until 72 that we were able to...
Actually, he entered in 92. So, here's he talking about Latimer, who was a urologist, not a guy who was an expert on x-rays.
And that's right. And this predates all of that stuff.
This was actually, letting a fox in the hen house. Dr. John Latimer, chairman of the Department of Urology at Columbia University Medical School, was allowed to inspect the materials, and he concluded that the Warren Commission was correct. Kennedy had been struck by only 2 bullets, both fired from the rear. His conclusions were much expected by students of the assassination, as Latimer had published works prior to his examination, in which he had defended the commission's conclusions. Researcher Harold Weisberg, author of the whitewash series, immediately attacked Latimer's conclusions, noting that Latimer was not a forensic pathologist, but rather a urologist. A science, Weisberg note, that progresses no higher in the body than the people. I like that. Dr. Latimer also testified before the Rockefeller Commission in 1975. There was no medical evidence to support a theory that the president hit by a bullet from any direction other than the rear and above. You see how bad this is, see?
Yeah.
You get this guy in there to give a false report. Also in 1972, Dr. Cyril Wecht, former president of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists and the coroner of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, became the first independent forensic pathologist to examine the autopsy material.
Mm-hmm.
In his report, which concentrated more on the single bullet theory than on the headshot, Dr. Wecht concluded the Kennedy case was unsolved and the single bullet theory implausible and scientifically untenable. He speculated on the possibility of a second assassin, most likely firing from the rear, but leaves the door open for a possible shot from the Grassy Knoll. His reason for this unequivocation is based on the first impressions of the doctors at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, who first described the throat wound as one of interest. But
should prevail to this day, Jim. The observations of so many doctors there about the avulse.
Yeah. But that's just talking about the throat wound. They also described in vivid detail the blowout at the back of the head and how we had extruding cerebellum as well as cerebral tissue, where the cerebellum is this compact part of the brain at the base that could not possibly have been caused by a bullet from behind, as Dr. Robert Livingston, a world authority on the human brain, would observe. So, in a second report on his examination of the autopsy materials written with Robert P. Smith, then director of research for the Committee to Investigate Assassination, Dr. Wecht spoke strongly against any headshots from the front or right. This is troubling. The available evidence, assuming it to be valid, gives no support to theories which postulate government to the right or the right front of the president's car. The wound in the president's head, as evidence from the autopsy photographs and x-rays, can only have been fired from somewhere to the rear of the president. If any
other... That's got to be wrong. It's got to be misquoted.
No, Larry. This is unfortunate.
I don't know of any time that Cyril Wecht would ever describe, this whole scenario like that, Jim.
Well, he appears to have done so at this point in time. I don't imagine this is a misquote. There's a reference there. See, Cyril was very troubled when David did his autopsy reports and presented. I was at his home with Cyril at the time when David talked about the results of his studies of the X-rays using optical densitometry and explained that, evidence for a shot that entered the right front and that distributed the metallic particles throughout the X-ray. And I was struck that Cyril was so very silent about all of this. It was even as though he didn't understand what David was explaining. But of course, he also confirmed the patching of the blowout at the back of the head. I mean, Cyril has to know better than what he's saying here. Already then at the time, he had to know better. If this is a correct quote of Cyril, then something is wrong.
Yeah, I know. That's my point. Okay.
Yeah. Dr. James Weston, Chief Medical Examiner of the State of New Mexico, examined the autopsy material at the Progressive CBS for its 1975 series, The American Assassins. Dr. Weston, then president-elect of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, of which Cyril had also been president, said he was willing to stake his reputation on the belief that Kennedy was hit by 2 bullets only, both fired from the rear. Well, this is bad.
No way.
This is bad. You're getting all these eminent authorities giving us complete bullshit about the assassination.
This has
Another former president of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists, Robert J. Joling, wrote the Saturday Evening Post in September 1975. There is no medical evidence to support the claim that anyone was shooting at the presidential limousine from the front or from the Grassy Knoll area. Repetitive reviewing of the Zapruder film does not lend credence to any claim that the president received a frontal or side headshot. This is embarrassing, Larry.
So nothing like front, back and to the left, huh?
This is very embarrassing. You can see this is going on at the time that the HSC is doing.
I don't know how
this is propaganda for the public in the wake of the HSCA investigation taking place. But look at the.
Okay, this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted you to. Let's finish with this in the news. As
this is being written and sent to the printer, Hustler magazine owner Larry Flint, a good man by the way, lies critically wounded in a Georgia hospital, shot down by a would-be assassin. It's not unreasonable, we think, to surmise the shooting is another link in the cover-up chain that leads back to Dallas. In the past couple of months, Flint had taken out full-page ads in major newspapers across the country, including the Dallas Times Herald, offering a reward of $1 million. Yes, that's $1 million for information that would lead to the arrest and conviction of JFK's real assassin. This was a good thing he did.
Yeah.
I feel the offer was a genuine one and not some publicity ploy, since Flint has assembled a panel of well-known researchers, including Mark Lane and Donald Freed, for the purpose of evaluating any evidence that may come in. We support Flint. Flint, it is turned around from cynical jerk to courageous crusader, and wish him a full and speedy recovery. We hope he doesn't lose his nerve or his life.
Wow.
So it's quite a dichotomy there, huh?
Go to footnote 15. Let's see what footnote 15 is, because that was cited for the quote from Cyril.
Okay, wait. No, it's not here.
Oh, no. It's at the very bottom. The notes are there, Larry.
Yeah, I know. But it jumps to another article here. Want me to go to the end? And see?
Are you? Yeah, go to the end. There. Oh, well, you got a 14. Go.
Yeah, because he's got a whole bunch of. See, here is his analysis.
Larry, there was a note 14 I saw. Keep.
Okay, I'll go up.
Yeah, go back up.
Oh, this is Priyo Sokaras. Okay. 14.
There. Okay. That's 14. Wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Cyril-wide analysis of the autopsy of President John F. Kennedy and the impossibility of the Warren Commission's lone assassination conclusion.
Wow, computers and automation. That was Sprague. That was Sprague.
Yeah, Sprague. Right. Yeah. And then 1516, the one I was after, Cyril Wepp and Robert Smith, the medical evidence in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the assassinations, edited by Peter Ned Scott, New York Vintage Books, 1976.
That's amazing. What a turnaround. What do you think? Wow. What do you think that's about? Wow.
Man, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Let's just put it this way. I'm very disturbed.
Yeah, man.
like I called up Cyril when I was pondering how the HSCA had contracted the wound at the back of the head to the small hole at the top of the head versus the huge blowout missing half at the back of his head, described in mathematical detail in the Bethesda autopsy report. And I said, Cyril, how did the HSC account for contracting the massive wound described in mathematical detail in the official autopsy report from Bethesda with their contraction to a small wound at the top of the head. And Cyril said to me, I'll have to check my notes. That's right.
You know, Jim, and he's so passionate when he speaks about the.
You know,
Yeah,
I was about to say that.
Repetitive. He's passionate. He's repetitive about the magic bullet and the trajectory. He never gets into the serious questions. He ought to address the one I put to him, being the most prominent of them all.
You know, I was about to say that. The last time I saw Cyril Weck, he almost appeared to be like an actor on stage. He was just so animated, and he was saying, if we only had
He's always animated, Gary.
One piece of evidence, it would be the single bullet theory. And of course, I could ring the bell on that. And you're right. He takes you a little bit down the road, but I've always been suspicious of Cyril Weck.
We need someone, and he was on the medical panel, to explain how the HSCA could possibly justify diverting from the description of the wound to the back of the head, described in mathematical detail, which David Lifton even diagrammed in best evidence, to the small hole of contraction at the top of the head. How do they possibly justify doing that? That's a question I put to him, which he did not answer.
Yeah, there you go. All right, fellas, I think we got a good show under our belt. So any final remarks before we go?
Catch any shrimp lately?
I walked outside and threw my cast net today, and I pulled up some shrimp for the first time this year.
All
in a
right.
5-foot cast net. And you know what? Last week I had a big old crab sitting right here, but I forgot to show it to you. I was to say this is for Robert Groden, and he was doing like that.
You didn't eat it?
Oh, yeah, so we did eat it. No doubt. So you guys are going to have to come on down, and I got a great time for y'all as we make the final JFK documentary, the final word, I guess, something like that. So anyway, guys, it's been great. I think we have a good show. This has been JFK, the new JFK show, number 216. We'll see you next week.